Hello supervisors, I'm just going to make this video to give you a little bit of guidance with the EPQ presentations this year. So I make it in January of 2022 and these are the things that we're looking to cover. Just going to talk a little bit about the logistics and the format. I'm just going to remind you of the assessment criteria because this is a big opportunity for students to earn some grades. I'm going to be talking a little bit about genre, audience and purpose, or the gap. I'm going to be talking about the EPQ journey, about the students taking questions, about the issue of audience engagement, and how to use Project Q effectively. Firstly, this year, given the KHDA stipulations that we can't be in rooms and meetings together beyond classrooms, I think it's best that we try to do the presentations as quickly as possible and that we do them online via Teams or Zoom. If we're to do that, students need to save the presentation as we need evidence. So it needs to be saved as an MP4, and I'll create an area in the SharePoint for us to save those particular recordings in. Presentation itself can be up to 20 minutes with 10 minutes of Q&A, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. Now, the key thing about the presentation is that it is not just a summary of the actual report or the artifact. It should go well beyond that. And as I say at the top, it's a kind of account of the entire EPQ journey. So it entails what the project is about, the reasoning that underpins the project, the aims and objectives that the students had. You know, they might write about why they did this particular thing, what was the genesis of the project, yeah? The research process is really important, and they should emphasize skills acquisition, problem solving, decision making as much as possible. Of course, they also need to think about reflecting on their learning and the kind of metacognitive elements of it and where they might go to next. Now this link over here I've already made a long screencast giving students all kinds of tips on how to make the presentation effective. So I'm not going to go into too much of that. You can watch that if you're interested, but I don't think you need to know everything. Next, I'm going to talk about the gap, or genre, audience, and purpose, as I have here. Now, the first thing is that the report itself is written for a highly specialized audience. It will be written in academic register with referencing, so it is very much like a dissertation or a formal report. In contrast, the presentation is to a non-specialist audience, a lay audience, and therefore all the technical detail, etc., should be lost. And it's very important that students are able to understand that there's a real skill to distilling your ideas and to putting them in everyday language. So that's what you're going to judge them on, is their ability to communicate to an audience that doesn't have specialist knowledge. Very importantly as well, the purpose is not only to inform, it's also to engage the audience. So they should be using persuasive techniques, using technology to have impact, using really interesting pictures and visuals, and I'll go into more of that in a moment. As you can see from this incredible picture here, obviously a picture is worth 1,000 words, as the cliche goes. I think it's very important that students realize the visuals will be key to engaging the audience, and they should not just choose decorative visuals, they should choose visuals that tell a story or give data. And one of the key things that we look for in this presentation is that there is a hook, especially if it's a scientific or technical area. It's very important that students draw their audience in and show why this research matters. Some students may also choose to use handouts or interactive elements. I've seen excellent online presentations that use polls, etc. You can even use a Kahoot. It's up to the student to decide. That's something that you can discuss with them, but they can be imaginative and daring. It's, as I said earlier, a really important opportunity to earn marks. And in a moment, I'll go into the mark scheme and you'll see how it fits in. I consider the presentation a wonderful opportunity to fill in the blanks, to make the research behind the scenes visible to the examiner. And I'm going to ask supervisors to make sure that they ask questions that highlights that work. As I said earlier, students need to highlight all their skills acquisition. Now, that doesn't only have to be academic things, that could be temperamental things, learning dispositions, learning things like resilience, learning to be able to cope with adversity, etc. So these personal development areas, which are so important, the affective element of learning, etc. And as I said, metacognitive skills, where they reflect on their ability to learn. What have they learned about their learning style? What have they learned that they need to target in the future? And we can use the EPQ like a piece of action research, where you can return to a particular phenomenon and see if you can do better next time. Now, just concentrating very quickly on the EPQ mark scheme. All of these skills should be covered. So firstly, assessment objective 1, which is the manage one. They should show something about their project plan, etc., their organization, their ability to identify objectives. 2, they should be talking about the research process, their use of resources, and highlighting critical evaluation of those sources. How did they decide the value of those sources? So that should come into the presentation as well, okay? A03, the develop and realize this is 40% of the entire project. So this is the problem solving, the decision making, the creative thinking. There's a wonderful opportunity in the presentation just to show the backstory of creativity and decision making, etc., to tell the audience about some of the problems they've had. I had a wonderful presentation last year in which a student made a drone and he couldn't get the parts. And in the end, he had to wait for his sister to come from England, and she bought 2 suitcases with all of the parts that he needed. And he had a wonderful photograph of this. So all of those interesting and entertaining anecdotes. Don't forget that the project is marked holistically. So the presentation will go alongside the report and the production log, and it will be marked as a complete product using the assessment criteria that you see before you. Now, questions and answers are a very important part of the particular presentation. The students, these shouldn't be too prepared. We could discuss with the students some of the kind of questions they could expect, but it's nice if some of them are spontaneous and the student is able to show problem solving, reflection on their feet in real time. So it's very important that the student has a very conceptualized command of their field. They need to go in there really knowing their stuff. They have to have a very prepared speech because there has to be evidence of it, and they need to be thinking very carefully about their choice of words. And in particular, they should think very carefully about the research process itself. Now, in terms of Project Q, the production log, the students require to show a carefully planned presentation, evidence of written speech, that could be a written speech or cards, hard copies of the slides. The presentation is delivered, as I said, with live Q&A, and there needs to be reflections on the presentations. For you, the supervisor, you need to sign off presentation part A that shows the student planning. You need to complete part B of Project Q, and you need to record some of the Q of A. Now, to make this easier for you, I've done a quick live video of how to do this on Project Q. Okay, so this is just a little short video to show you what to do in Project Q. You can see that here there's a part A and a part B. Part A is for the student to fill in, part B is for the supervisors to fit in. So the students really do need to use the EPQ mark scheme here, as I indicated earlier. So they should show careful planning. That's assessment objective 1 here. Some students will actually list all of the slides one by one. My student here has done that very generally. Some students put in a lot more evidence than that. Don't forget, alongside this, they're going to submit the slides themselves carefully printed out and evidence of a written speech and or cue cards, so they can illustrate how carefully it's planned in that way too. Over here, the students also, as always, need to try to fill in this idea of modifications I've made as a result of rehearsal or discussion with my supervisor. As I indicated earlier, all students should actually buddy up with someone and really practice this presentation carefully. A major element of this will be assessment objective number 4, communication skills, and also assessment objective number 1, which is actually succeeding in your project targets. So they should really know the speech inside out. Ideally not have to look at notes. Even online, I think looking at things like eye contact, etc., fluency and pace are really important. So once the students finish this, you'll sign this off. And then when they actually give the presentation to the live audience, which as I've said, we're probably going to do online, then it's up to you to fill in this bit of it. I don't tend to write too much while the speech is going on just because I need to concentrate. But I do keep a few notes on my iPad. So it's a good idea to perhaps have your iPad next to you so you can remember this. In this case, of course, we are going to record these and save them as an MP4, so you'll be able to refer back to them. And these are the bits that you have to fill in, just the nature of the audience, what kind of presentation was used. Sometimes, as I said, students might be using polls, etc., handouts or leaflets. Perhaps more difficult to do online. They need to be imaginative in that department. You have to comment on the content and the delivery of the presentation. I sometimes divide that up, but not always. And you'll see I put down a few notes here. This is really seen as an important part of the holistic assessment. And so, as I indicated earlier, it's very good if you could put in some of the invisible things of the project, things that the examiner may not know about. And I'd particularly say when you get to the answer, the question and answer sections, make sure that if you're going to ask the student questions, two things. One, try to cover all assessment objectives. AO1, which is project planning, AO2, which is sources, AO3, which is decision making and problem solving, and AO4, where the student reflects about their learning and does all the kind of metacognitive stuff, which is so valued on the EPQ. So you have to put down here a few examples of the questions asked and the answers to them. They really do like this, okay? And once that's finished, then you can sign that off. Then the final part of the EPQ will be the summary and reflection. And now that they've finished everything, the student is able to go on to that. So I hope that that was useful and that gives you a good insight in how to use the Project Q app. Okay, so in conclusion, we just watched how to do the admin work in Project Q there. So just to sum up, it's about 30 minutes. This year, as I said, it's got to be online. Please make sure that the student has recorded this and that it's saved as an MP4. In exceptional circumstances, some of the students might deliver the presentation, but they have to do that within normal classes, so it'll only be a handful. We've talked about genre, audience, and purpose, and the two things to stress there are that they should be entertaining and interesting, and that the audience is non-specialist. We talked about the fact that the presentation is the whole journey and not a summary of the report. We looked at the assessment criteria there and how this is a wonderful opportunity to earn marks, EPQ being holistically marked. We talked a little bit about questions and answers, and we looked at your role in recording some of those. We talked about audience engagement and some of the devices that they might use. We looked at the Project Q. And then finally, when they finish the presentation, the final task in the EPQ is a long summary and reflection stage, and I've created a separate video for that. As ever, thank you so much for your contribution to the EPQ. We can't do it without you.